Good evening. It's good to be able to come together again and to share another message. We're talking about the life of Jesus. This is going to be, I think, lesson number 9. If you are following along in the with the outline, I'll send a link. There should be a link with on Facebook, but if you'll go to, again, the same website as last week, BibleTalk.tv. You can see that on the screen. And look up the life of Jesus. It should be lesson number 9, the third to the last Passover week. And you'll find the lesson notes there, and you can print those out and continue to take the notes. We're going to be continuing the discussion of, we've been going third to fourth Passover. Well, this is kind of the last part of that year. And the third Passover to the last week of his life, and so that's where we're at today. Jesus has been in Jerusalem and has been dealing with the religious leaders, and they have rejected him, and he's continuing to cause some havoc in their thinking, and they are rejecting him. So starting off tonight, we're going to be going to John chapter 10, verse 22 through 39. Jesus at the Feast of Dedication. Now, the Feast of Dedication you may have know of as the Feast of Lights or Hanukkah. This lasts 8 days, and it was instituted at a time when a foreign king had desecrated the temple. I believe it was Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. He was a Greek ruler. But anyway, the Jews instituted a feast to commemorate what happened after all of that. They lit a candle in the temple, and they had enough oil, at least what the Talmud says. They had enough oil for one day, and it lasted for a whole week. And so they continued to celebrate that as a feast as years went by. So Jesus is in Jerusalem celebrating this with the Jews. And while he's there, the Jews demand him to tell them plainly if he is the Christ. And he responds to them, "I told you, and you did not believe." Then he goes on to say that he and the Father are one. Now, he says he and the Father are one. And this, if you're a Jew, is outrageous. And up to this point, Jesus doesn't typically publicly assert himself so vividly as being one with God. Jesus says, the Jews, when they hear this, they pick up stones, and Jesus says to them, "Which of my good works that I have done do you stone me for?" In fact, let's go to John chapter 10, verse 37 and 38. It says, if I do not do the deeds of my Father, do not believe in me. But if I am doing them, even if you do not believe me, believe the deeds, so that you may know and understand that the Father is in me, and I am in the Father. So Jesus has done many things, and they have seen it, and they can't deny the things that he's done, but they want him to say specifically whether he's the Christ. And he doesn't directly tell them, and yet at the same time he does, and he offends them greatly. Well, after this, Jesus leaves in John chapter, we go to John chapter 10, verse 40 and 42, where it tells us, this is where it talks about Lazarus. That's the start of that story. Actually, I got confused there. John chapter 10, verse 40, I believe, tells us that Jesus leaves the area, and he's going to an area where John was baptizing. And then while there, so he's basically gone away from the Jews in Jerusalem to get a little bit of a break. And think about it this way. The timing of this, Jesus is in Jerusalem at the Feast of Hanukkah, which is around this time of year, and then the Passover week is going to come in the spring, so he's still got a few months left to go before he comes back, and so he's gone off to Bethany, and he stays not Bethany, but he goes off to a place where John was baptizing for a while, and then while he's there, some friends, or his friends Mary and Martha, send to Jesus and say that Lazarus is dying. Now, while he's there, Jesus postpones going, and we're going to break up the story of Lazarus a little bit here, because that's how this these lessons have been broken up. Because it seems like as Jesus is going back, he takes his time getting to where he's going to see Lazarus and to raise him. But he's told that Lazarus is sick, and he says this sickness isn't to death, but it is to the glory of God. And so he waits a few days before he goes or does anything. He waits 2 days. And then he says, let's go to Lazarus, which means Lazarus is in Bethany, which is just over the hill, over the Mount of Olives from Jerusalem. It's not a long trip. And so that means he's going back to Jerusalem, where the Jews hate him and are ready to kill him. And the apostles know this, and so they see that Jesus is in danger. And if he goes, and Jesus tells the disciples that Lazarus is asleep. And they think, well, fine, if he's asleep, why do we need to go back? But Jesus says, okay, well, he's asleep, which means he's going to wake up, but Lazarus is dead. And this is an interesting moment where we get to see our friend who we call Doubting Thomas. Instead of doubting or fearful, as we might think him being, he gets up and says, hey, let's just go down there. If he's dead, why don't we go ahead and face it too? We'll die with you, Jesus, if we go down there. And he's ready to go and die with Jesus. And on the way back in Luke chapter 13, at least that's the way it seems, Luke chapter 13, verse 23 through 24, someone said to Jesus, Lord, will those who are saved be few? And he said to them, strive to enter through the narrow door. For many, I tell you, will seek to enter and will not be able. Jesus basically tells the people that people will be coming to feast at the Father's table that you don't expect. People from far off that you wouldn't expect because they're not Jews. And people that you know. People that you would expect to be sitting at Jesus or God's table, the Father's table, will not be there. So that is his response to that question. Continuing on, number 97, another threat from Herod. Luke chapter 13, 31 through 35, and Matthew 23, 37 through 39. It's still either where John was baptizing or on his way back to Bethany. Some Pharisees come to tell Jesus to flee because Herod is looking for him. Jesus' response to these threats is interesting, because usually he talks to the Pharisees very harshly, but he's not specifically, he basically tells them, you go back to that fox and tell him that he can come and find me, but nothing's going to happen, basically, because I'm on my way to Jerusalem, where that's where they'll kill me. But he doesn't really concern himself with the Pharisees there. Also, at this point, Jesus laments over Jerusalem and publicly declares to the people that the people are going to reject him, and declares that Israel will forsake him. And also says something interesting, I think, that he says that you won't see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And that points to them, to the triumphal entry, where they say exactly those things. And so these people aren't going to see him again until the Passover, until they greet him as he comes into Jerusalem. I may have skipped a few slides. If you needed to see the slides earlier, 97, that's Luke 13, 31 through 35, and Matthew 23, 37 through 39. Next one, the cure of the man with dropsy. Now, this is Luke chapter 14, verse 1 through 6. Still, we're probably either where John was baptizing, where Jesus had been staying, or on our way to Bethany. Jesus spends a few days at some point spends some time around some people in a city and eats with a Pharisee and others. And there's a man outside the Pharisee's house who has a disease. And possibly the Pharisees maybe have put him there to test him because it's the Sabbath, or he's there for some other reason. But the Pharisees, almost like lions lying in wait, looking for Jesus to make a mistake. When they do this, and they look at Jesus in this way, he always throws things back in their face. In Luke chapter 14, verse 5, it says, he said to them, which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on the Sabbath, will not immediately pull him out? Jesus points out that his healing is work, but it's the kind of work that should be done all the time, no matter what day it is, caring for others. If you are willing to care for an animal that has fallen or hurt itself on the Sabbath day, should you not care for another human being which was made in God's image? And Jesus throws back at them the hypocrisy of the things that they're saying, the fact that they make one thing more important than another because of the way they look at things, rather than the reality that this is a person who needs to be cared for. And but it's the Sabbath, so we can't do that. That's not the way of the Lord. Next, the parable of the Great Supper, Luke chapter 14, 7 through 24. Still, this is at the same house with the same Pharisees and same group of people. And Jesus sees how the people are behaving and how they're taking their seats. And he tells the people, don't be taking the best seats. Those who raise themselves up to get the best seats in the house will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be honored. And that's how we are to live. He also reminds them not to do things for favors or for rewards, because if that's why we do them, we'll have our rewards on earth and not in heaven. That we need to do good regardless of what others can do for us. That the one who will reward us is God. Not to seek rewards from people, but know that we have a treasure stored up for us in heaven. And at this time, he's giving them some parables, and one of the parables about this great feast, part of the thing about the great feast is he's invited all these people, and they decide not to come. So he invites everybody else, and the people who were invited, and think of that as the Jews and the Pharisees, maybe in specific, but they're being rejected because they rejected the invitation. Jesus is there inviting them to come along, and yet they are rejecting him. Jesus once again is warning them that there is no other way but me. If you're going to reject me, then others will come and take your place. The Gentiles will be honored where you are not, because you rejected me, and they will accept me. 100, the cost of discipleship, Luke chapter 14, 25 through 35. Still possibly where John baptized, or on the way. I think this is still with the same Pharisee's house. At this point, Jesus basically points out that absolute devotion to the Lord is what he's looking for. That beyond one's family. So if anything that gets in our way, we need to put it aside. Anything that becomes an obstacle to us following the Lord, we need to overcome that. No matter what it is, if it comes between us and Jesus, it needs to go. He points out that we need to be willing to suffer for his name, that one's faith is a necessary, willingness to suffer is part of one's faith. And also a willingness and readiness to go and do what is needed, rather than thinking of the easy ways to do things. And then desiring to live life in such a way that we are salt and light, that we bring the best to the world around us, and we do not darken it. Jesus regularly prunes his disciples by teaching them things that make it difficult to want to follow him, and realize that they have to choose between their way or God's way. And for us, he continues to do this. We have to choose Christ or our own way, the Bible's way or man's way. We can choose purity over popularity, or being devoted to him, or choosing our own path. Continuing on, Jesus tells parables of lost people and things. And it's probably still in the same area. The banquet is over, and then Jesus, after hanging out with the Pharisees and the so-called important people, he goes and hangs out with the general populace, the publicans and sinners, the tax collectors and sinners, who also wanted to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes grumble about this, accusing him because he associates with undesirable people. And he tells the crowd several parables: the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. And the point of all of these is that God is searching for those that are lost. Even if it's just one. Even if it may seem like it's not that important, Jesus, or God, is searching for the one that is lost. And not only that, but he rejoices over the one that is lost, and he expects that others would rejoice in the same thing. That the son in the story of the prodigal son, the oldest, or the other son who stayed, he again does not go into the feast because he's chosen not to celebrate with the Father the return of the Son. So he chose to be outside when he could be inside. And the Pharisees, in the same way, he's trying to show them that what you're doing right now is choosing to be outside when the Father is celebrating. And what Jesus does that the Pharisees do not is he gives the sinners hope. And he rebukes the Jewish leaders because they make things more difficult for these sinners than returning to God. Jesus not only rebukes the leaders here, but he points out that because of their attitudes and hearts, they choose not to come to the feast, meaning they don't get to eat at the Father's table by their own choice. The punishments that they receive, it's by their own choice and not because of something anybody else has done, because they've been invited, but they chose not to join. The parables, the next 102, parables of the unjust steward and the rich man and Lazarus. Luke chapter 16, verse 1 through 33. And it's still probably on the way to Bethany. The parables are spoken to crowds following him. On their way to Lazarus. The first one is the unjust steward, and this parable focuses on disciples' need to serve only God and do so sincerely. Jesus makes several points in here, which includes the idea that one who is faithful with little, he will be faithful with a lot. And also the rich man and Lazarus, the parable warns that the proper use of one's wealth and blessings to serve serve the needs of others, especially those who suffer. The finality of judgment, once it is pronounced, and people who are not convinced by God's words will not be convinced if someone is raised from the dead, which points to Jesus that if you don't believe now, if you're not at least intrigued now, if you're not at least hearing something now and recognizing who I am, rising from the dead is not going to cause someone to believe. Which is interesting because sometimes we think that, well, if I was there, I'd obviously believe. How could they not believe? Well, people are people, and we have a tendency to convince ourselves of what is true before we actually see it or hear it or what have you. And I say that always when I try to put myself in the situation of maybe the bad guys, to try to learn what God and Jesus are trying to teach them. And the Pharisees at this point, I try to pay attention to what Jesus is trying to tell them so that if I find myself thinking like that I can address that and hear what Jesus is telling me or telling them. And if he's basically telling them, I'm going to die, I'm going to raise from the dead, and you're not going to believe. If you don't believe the Moses and the prophets already, them coming back from the dead isn't going to convince you either. Number 103, more instructions to the disciples. Luke describes further training that Jesus gives to his disciples as they travel towards Bethany, warning against those who would make others stumble. The apostles ask Jesus to increase their faith, and Jesus responds that if you have a little faith, as much as a mustard seed, great things can be done. And just think about that, because they're saying, increase our faith so that we will be able to do these things, so that we will not cause people to stumble, so that we'll be able to face all these things. And Jesus says you don't need great faith, you just need faith like a mustard seed that just waits and trusts. I was made for a purpose, and I will fulfill that purpose because that's what you've made me for. We just need to have a little faith. And sometimes it's hard to comprehend, but with a little, God does amazing things. The duties of a disciple is just to serve the Lord. We should not do things to receive thanks. We should not do things to congratulate ourselves. Jesus says that we need to think of ourselves and speak of ourselves as unworthy servants. We have only done what is our duty. And that's something that's always been a difficult thing for me as a teacher or as anything when I'm up in front of people. I've always had this idea that I don't want that kind of, I don't want to be thanked, though I don't want to necessarily say that. I am grateful for the opportunity to serve, and I appreciate those who do even more, do better things than what I do. But we need to think of ourselves as, I'm just here to serve. I'm not a teacher. I'm a servant of God. I'm a student. I've gleaned some things, and here's what I want to teach or to show you. It's not that I have anything to teach, but Jesus does. And that's how we need to think. Jesus raises Lazarus. We finally made it. We finally made it from where Jesus was into Bethany. John chapter 11, verse 17 through 46. Bethany is about 2 miles from Jerusalem, and it has taken Jesus at least 4 days to get there, probably more since Lazarus is already in the tomb. Lazarus is the brother of Mary and Martha, and Jesus stays at their home. And when he was in the area, Martha meets him before he gets to the village, and she's upset because he didn't get there on time to heal Lazarus before he died. But Jesus says he will rise again. And Martha acknowledges the resurrection, that he will rise again, but does not perceive that he means right now. Jesus says, I am the resurrection. And that probably triggers a little bit more with her at that moment, but maybe not. Then she goes and gets Mary and says that Jesus wants to meet him. And Mary is a little bit more bold in what she says, that he could have saved him from death if he had come. And she is overcome with grief. And we see at this time also that Jesus is overwhelmed by the human emotion, that all of that's going around him, the death of his friend, the sorrow that it has caused in his friend's family and those around them. And we see here that Jesus wept. But then Jesus calls Lazarus to come out of the tomb, and Lazarus does so. In Jesus' prayer, we learn that the reason for the delay was to be able to perform this great miracle to glorify God through Lazarus' death and his resurrection. It was done in this way to provide yet another sign of his identity as the Messiah, and also point to, if I can raise this guy after 4 days, I'll only be dead for 3. If I can raise this guy, I can be raised as well. And this is a story, again, like I always try to point out, like there's some of these stories that we just pass over and we don't necessarily stop and think about the consequences or just the implications of Jesus waiting. You know, we went over this with my kids the other day, and my 5-year-old Darcy, she said, "It doesn't make sense, Dad. Why would Jesus wait when he could heal him? I mean, Jesus didn't even have to walk to Bethany. He could have healed Lazarus whenever. Why did he wait?" And we tried to explain these things to her, that Jesus had a plan. And in that plan, Lazarus had to die. He knew that Lazarus was going to die. He said his sickness wasn't unto death, but he says that he's asleep and that he's dead. So he acknowledges all of these things, but the whole point is so that they would believe, so that they would know that Jesus can raise the dead. Now, he's raised people from the dead before, but I don't think it was as long-term a thing as this, as 4 days where he would have been rotting at this point. And so, when Darcy asked this question, it's still at the end, after we explain it, she still says, it doesn't make sense. And sometimes we need to stop and allow ourselves to wrestle with things like this. It's not a lack of faith to say, God, why do bad things happen? Why do bad things happen even to those that you love? Why, in fact, does it seem to happen a lot to those that you love? Well, we need to take comfort in the fact that God does not exclude himself from the pain that comes from life. Jesus himself suffering, his suffering is greater than most of ours, in a very specific way. But we can take comfort from that as well, that Jesus had a plan, and he wanted to show the power of God so that we would know and be able to trust in him. Now, after this, the high priest see that what Jesus has done. John chapter 11, verse 47 through 53. And those who saw what happened, they go and report to the Jewish leaders. They acknowledge the power of Jesus, but the reaction is fear that their authority and position would be challenged. And they decide to kill him. So at this point, rather than acknowledge this great power, they're concerned about themselves, they're concerned about what they want, and they decide to kill him, though he is acting with the power of God. they have now become complete enemies of Jesus. And Jesus then again will retreat from there a little ways, not far, but a little ways into a place called Ephraim. John chapter 11, verse 54 through 57. And he avoids the situation while he has a little bit of time left before the Passover. He'll stay there until the final Passover week. The lessons that we can get from this, that we've looked at this evening, is just basically that Jesus was focused. He was focused on one thing: ministering to the people and showing them why he was there and what that they need to follow him. Whether you're the leaders who he rebuked severely, or a sinner who he welcomed along to change their ways and to follow him. Jesus wasn't just seeking to save physically sick people, but specifically the spiritually sick people. And many of those were following him. And he was focused on ministering to those people. Many times we have distractions. This world, especially right now, there's so many things that are on our minds. You know, we're afraid of this virus. Friends of ours have got the virus, and their families have been in the hospital. People that we know and care about have died because of this. The election and everything that's going on has us in turmoil and has fear and anger and frustration and all of these things. We cannot let those things take away our love for Jesus Christ. And the fact that love is greater than this nation, it's greater than this virus, it's greater than any problems that we face. That his love is greater. And we need to share that with people rather than discussions about political things as much. Jesus will always arrive in his time. The people who were mourning for Lazarus, they had been mourning for days and days. And finally Jesus arrives, and their fears and sorrows are turned into joy because their brother was returned to them. And we get upset and worked up waiting for Jesus to answer many times. But whether very soon, in a little while, or in the end of time, Jesus always arrives and brings the comfort and healing that we need and the salvation that we need. And that's the thing that we need to be most focused on, is that the joy that good things are to come. Something better is around the corner. Something better is coming. And that's the Son, Jesus Christ, returning to welcome us home. We don't have anything to worry about. Things in this world may not be great all the time, but we have something to look forward to. The day that our Savior returns and takes us home. Thank you.